Have you ever wondered how far someone would go to reclaim their life after losing everything? What if the person who swore to love and protect you turned out to be your greatest enemy? This is the story of Eleanor Carter, a woman who was betrayed, broken, but refused to stay down. Her journey will take you through heartbreak, secrets, and revenge, but also resilience, redemption, and ultimate triumph. Trust me, you won't want to miss a single moment of this gripping tale. Hit subscribe now so you don't miss any of the twists and turns coming your way. The chandeliers sparkled like frozen starlight above the grand ballroom of the Waldorf Astoria Hotel in New York City. Crystal glasses clinked softly against silver trays carried by waitstaff weaving through a sea of tailored suits and designer gowns. The air smelled faintly of champagne and expensive perfume, but beneath it all lingered something heavier: tension, anticipation, maybe even dread. Jonathan Carter stood at the center of it all. Tall, broad-shouldered, and impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit that cost more than most people made in a year, he exuded confidence. His sharp jawline and piercing blue eyes had earned him features often described as presidential in business magazines. Tonight, however, those same features radiated arrogance. He was about to make a statement, a declaration, that would ripple far beyond this room. Behind him on stage, a massive screen displayed the logo of Carter Development, his billion-dollar real estate empire. To his left sat Sophia, his mistress. She was young, too young, and stunning in a sleek red gown that hugged her curves like it had been painted on. Her blonde hair cascaded over one shoulder, and her lips curled into a smug smile. A barely noticeable bump under her dress hinted at the pregnancy Jonathan planned to announce tonight. He cleared his throat, tapping the microphone twice to ensure it worked. The murmurs in the crowd faded into silence. Every eye turned toward him. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his deep voice carrying effortlessly across the cavernous space. "Thank you for joining me tonight. As many of you know, we're here to celebrate not just another successful quarter for Carter Development, but a new chapter in my life." A few polite nods rippled through the audience. Some attendees exchanged curious glances. This wasn't typical corporate jargon. For years, Jonathan continued, pacing slowly across the stage, I've dedicated myself to building something extraordinary. A legacy. But tonight, I want to share something personal. Something transformative. At the back of the room, Eleanor Carter adjusted herself slightly in her wheelchair. Her hands rested calmly on her lap, fingers interlaced. If anyone had bothered to look closely, they might have noticed how perfectly still she was, like a statue carved from marble. Her dark brown hair framed her face in soft waves, and though her green eyes were warm, there was steel behind them. Steel that hadn't dulled despite everything she'd endured. "And now," Jonathan said, turning dramatically to gesture toward Sophia, who rose gracefully from her seat, "allow me to introduce the woman who will stand beside me as I embark on this next journey. Sophia Bennett, my partner, my muse, and soon-to-be mother of our child." The room erupted into chaos. Gasps echoed like thunderclaps. Champagne flutes tilted precariously in shocked hands. Women whispered furiously behind their fans, men muttered curses under their breath. Cameras flashed wildly as reporters scrambled to capture every second of the scandal unfolding before them. But no one reacted quite like Eleanor. From her position near the rear doors, she didn't scream or cry. She didn't collapse or storm out. Instead, she smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. It wasn't forgiving or sad. It was cold, a razor-sharp curve of her lips that sent a shiver down Jonathan's spine. From where he stood on stage, he felt it. That smile struck him harder than any slap ever could. For a moment, his bravado wavered. His polished facade cracked. Eleanor raised her glass, a simple flute of sparkling water, and inclined her head ever so slightly. Then she turned her chair and rolled silently toward the exit, leaving behind a trail of whispers and stunned faces. Back on stage, Jonathan tried to regain control. He lifted his own glass high, forcing a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. To the future, he declared, his voice booming over the din, to new beginnings. No one cheered. Instead, the room buzzed with speculation. Who was this man, standing brazenly before them, flaunting his betrayal? And who was the woman in the wheelchair, the wife who hadn't broken, hadn't crumbled, but had simply smiled? As the evening unraveled, one thing became clear: Jonathan Carter had just ignited a war. And if Eleanor's chilling smile was any indication, he had severely underestimated his opponent. 3 years ago, Jonathan and Eleanor Carter were the definition of success. If you flipped through any glossy magazine or scrolled through social media back then, their faces would be plastered everywhere, smiling, radiant, untouchable. They weren't just a power couple, they were the power couple. Together, they had built Carter Development from the ground up, transforming it into one of the most respected names in real estate. Eleanor was the creative genius behind the operation. With her sharp eye for design and innovative ideas, she turned cold concrete structures into architectural masterpieces. She had a knack for envisioning spaces that people didn't even know they wanted yet: luxury condos with panoramic views, eco-friendly offices that blended seamlessly into nature, and sprawling suburban homes that felt like dreams come true. Her sketches became blueprints, and her vision became reality. Jonathan, on the other hand, was the face of the company. Charismatic, charming, and endlessly persuasive, he could sell ice cubes to Eskimos. Whether he was pitching to investors, negotiating deals, or shaking hands at ribbon-cutting ceremonies, he exuded confidence. Together, they made magic, a perfect balance of creativity and business acumen. Their life seemed like something out of a fairy tale. They lived in a sprawling mansion nestled in the hills of Malibu, complete with infinity pools, floor-to-ceiling windows, and breathtaking ocean views. Their vacations were legendary: skiing in Aspen, lounging on private beaches in Bali, exploring the cobblestone streets of Paris. Awards lined their shelves, photos of them grinning alongside celebrities filled their walls, and their public image was flawless. Everyone wanted to be them, or at least close enough to bask in their glow. But beneath the surface, cracks began to form. It started on a crisp autumn morning 2.5 years ago. Eleanor had insisted on visiting one of their newest construction sites, a high-rise project downtown that she'd personally designed. "I need to see it," she'd told Jonathan over breakfast. "There are details only I can catch." He'd nodded absent-mindedly, already scrolling through emails on his phone. At the time, neither of them realized how much those words would haunt them later. The site was bustling with activity when Eleanor arrived. Hard hats bobbed like synchronized dancers as workers moved steel beams and poured concrete. The air smelled of dust and machinery, and the hum of drills drowned out conversation. Eleanor climbed onto a temporary platform near the top floor, sketchpad in hand, jotting down notes about structural adjustments. And then, without warning, the platform collapsed. One moment, she was standing tall, pencil scratching against paper. The next, she was falling, plummeting through open space before crashing onto scaffolding below. The impact shattered her spine. When Jonathan got the call, he dropped everything and raced to the hospital. For weeks, he barely left Eleanor's side, holding her hand as doctors delivered grim diagnoses. "She'll never walk again," they said gently but firmly. "The damage is too severe." At first, Jonathan tried to stay strong. He promised Eleanor they'd get through this together. He hired the best physical therapists, remodeled their home to accommodate her wheelchair, and vowed to keep their lives as normal as possible. But as days turned into months, something inside him shifted. He stopped visiting her therapy sessions. He avoided talking about her accident altogether. Instead, he threw himself into work, spending longer hours at the office and attending more events alone. His excuses grew thinner: "I have meetings. This deal won't close itself. You understand, right? What Eleanor understood was that her husband was slipping away. She saw it in the way he flinched whenever someone mentioned her injury. She noticed how his gaze lingered on younger women at parties, the ones who could still dance, still run, still do all the things she couldn't anymore. And she felt it in the silence that stretched between them, heavy and suffocating. For Eleanor, the accident wasn't just physical, it was emotional. It stripped her of her independence, her confidence, her identity. Yet, unlike Jonathan, she refused to let it break her completely. While he distanced himself, she adapted. She learned to navigate her new reality with quiet determination. She poured her energy into designing accessible spaces, determined to create beauty and functionality for others facing similar challenges. But no matter how hard she tried, the pain lingered, not just in her body, but in her heart. Because deep down, she knew that Jonathan wasn't just losing interest in her, he was replacing her. As time went on, the golden couple everyone admired began to fade. Their once perfect life crumbled like sandcastles washed away by the tide. And though neither of them spoke about it openly, the foundation of their marriage had been irrevocably damaged. Little did Jonathan know, however, that Eleanor's resilience ran deeper than he could ever imagine. Beneath her calm exterior lay a woman who had survived far worse than betrayal, and who was quietly plotting her revenge. Eleanor Carter's days had become a carefully orchestrated routine, one that Jonathan controlled down to the minute. At first, it seemed like he was being helpful, ensuring she had everything she needed while recovering from her accident. But over time, his attentiveness morphed into something darker, more suffocating. He managed her medication, doling out pills with the precision of a pharmacist. "This will help with the pain," he'd say, placing a small cup of tablets in her hand. Eleanor didn't question him at first, trusting that he knew best. But as weeks turned into months, she began to notice subtle changes. Some days, the doses left her foggy, unable to focus or even hold a conversation. Other times, they made her sleep for hours on end, missing meals and appointments altogether. Her schedule became equally rigid. Every hour of her day was accounted for: therapy sessions, doctor visits, meetings with financial advisors who assured her that Jonathan was handling their investments perfectly. She rarely saw the inside of the office anymore, and when she did, it felt foreign, like stepping into someone else's world. Slowly but surely, Jonathan stripped her of her role in Carter development, citing her health as the reason. "You need to rest," he'd say, brushing off her protests with a dismissive wave. Then there was Sophia. She arrived quietly, introduced as a new hire brought in to assist with marketing campaigns. Young, ambitious, and undeniably beautiful, Sophia quickly ingratiated herself with the team. Her laugh echoed through the halls of the office, drawing attention wherever she went. To Eleanor, however, she felt like a shadow looming over her life, a reminder of everything she'd lost. At home, Jonathan spoke about Sophia often, praising her creativity and work ethic. "She's a natural," he'd say, scrolling through presentations she'd prepared. "Reminds me of you, back in the early days." The comparison stung, though Eleanor tried not to let it show. Instead, she nodded politely, masking her growing unease behind a practiced smile. But the signs were impossible to ignore. Late-night phone calls that ended abruptly when she entered the room. Text messages Jonathan deleted before she could glance at his screen. And then there were the nights he didn't come home at all, claiming he was working late or attending networking events. Each excuse chipped away at what little trust remained between them. It wasn't until one fateful evening that the truth began to unravel. Eleanor sat alone in the dimly lit living room, flipping through design magazines to distract herself from the emptiness of the house. Her phone buzzed on the coffee table, startling her. Picking it up, she saw a number she didn't recognize flash across the screen. Curious, she opened the message. Asterisk, "You deserve to know the truth." Asterisk. The words sent a chill down her spine. Before she could process them, another notification popped up, an attached photo. Squinting at the image, her breath caught in her throat. It was Jonathan, standing outside an OB/GYN clinic, his arm wrapped possessively around Sophia's waist. They looked happy, carefree, oblivious to the camera capturing their private moment. For a long moment, Eleanor stared at the photo, her mind racing. The pieces clicked together, the late nights, the excuses, the way Jonathan had distanced himself from her life. This wasn't just infidelity, it was betrayal on a scale she hadn't imagined. Her hands trembled as she set the phone down, the weight of the revelation pressing down on her chest. Anger bubbled beneath the surface, hot and fierce, but she forced herself to stay calm. Now wasn't the time for emotion. Now was the time for clarity, for strategy. Because if there was one thing Eleanor Carter understood, it was this: revenge wasn't about acting impulsively. It was about planning meticulously, gathering evidence, and striking when the moment was right. As she sat there, staring into the darkness of the room, a dangerous thought took root in her mind. Jonathan had underestimated her once before, assuming she would crumble under the weight of his neglect. But Eleanor wasn't the same woman she used to be. She was stronger now, sharper, more determined than ever. And Jonathan? He had no idea what was coming. Eleanor Carter wasn't one to sit idly by while her life unraveled around her. If Jonathan thought she'd crumble under the weight of his betrayal, he had gravely underestimated her resolve. That night, after receiving the anonymous tip and the damning photo of him with Sophia, something inside her shifted, a spark ignited that refused to be extinguished. She knew she couldn't face this alone. The next morning, she reached out to Detective Marcus Reed, an old friend from college who now worked private investigations on the side. Marcus was a tall, wiry man with sharp gray eyes that missed nothing. His reputation for digging up secrets was unmatched, and Eleanor trusted him implicitly. "I need your help," she said when they met at a quiet cafe downtown. Her voice was steady, but there was steel beneath it. "I think my husband tried to kill me." Marcus raised an eyebrow, leaning forward slightly. "That's a big claim, Ellie. You got proof?" "Not yet," she admitted. "But I have suspicions, and I'm willing to bet you can find the evidence." With Marcus on board, Eleanor began piecing together the puzzle of her shattered life. What started as a simple inquiry quickly spiraled into something far more sinister. First, Marcus uncovered hidden bank accounts in Jonathan's name, accounts Eleanor didn't even know existed. Millions of dollars funneled through offshore holdings, transactions timed suspiciously close to key moments in their marriage. One deposit stood out, a large sum transferred just days before her accident at the construction site. Then came the surveillance footage. Using his contacts, Marcus managed to obtain security tapes from the site where Eleanor had fallen. As they reviewed the grainy video, a chilling detail emerged: Jonathan had been there earlier that day. He'd inspected the platform himself, speaking briefly with the foreman before leaving. "He shouldn't have been there at all," Marcus muttered, pausing the playback. Construction sites aren't exactly CEO territory. Eleanor felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach. "He must have known about the structural issues," she whispered. "He knew it wouldn't hold." It was a horrifying realization, one that made her blood run cold, but it wasn't the worst of it. Next, Marcus turned his attention to Eleanor's medical records. For months, she'd suspected something was off about her medication. The dizziness, the fatigue, the inability to think clearly, it wasn't normal. With Marcus's help, she discovered the truth: Jonathan had tampered with her prescriptions. Dosages increased without her knowledge, drugs prescribed that weren't listed in her chart. "He was keeping you weak," Marcus explained grimly. "Dependent. Making sure you couldn't fight back." The words hit Eleanor like a punch to the gut. She'd always assumed her struggles were a result of her injury, a natural consequence of her new reality. But now she understood: her pain wasn't just physical. It had been orchestrated, manipulated, weaponized against her. As the pieces fell into place, a terrifying question loomed over everything: was her accident truly an accident? Or had Jonathan planned it all along? The thought made her sick to her stomach, but deep down, she already knew the answer. Jonathan hadn't just betrayed her emotionally, he'd betrayed her in every way imaginable. He'd isolated her, controlled her, and nearly destroyed her, all so he could live his perfect life with Sophia. Eleanor stared at the stack of documents spread across her dining table, her mind racing. Each piece of evidence painted a clearer picture of the man she once loved, or thought she did. Beneath his polished exterior lay a calculating, ruthless individual who stopped at nothing to get what he wanted. For years, she'd believed herself powerless, trapped in a wheelchair and dependent on Jonathan for everything. But now, armed with the truth, Eleanor realized something crucial: she wasn't powerless anymore. Jonathan had underestimated her strength, her intelligence, her determination. And that mistake would cost him dearly. A slow, dangerous smile spread across Eleanor's face as she leaned back in her chair. Revenge wasn't just a desire, it was a necessity. And she intended to serve it ice cold. Eleanor Carter had always been a woman of strategy, and now, with the truth laid bare before her, she was ready to play the ultimate game. If Jonathan wanted her weak, compliant, and broken, then that was exactly what he would see, for now. Every morning, she followed his script to perfection. She took her pills under his watchful eye, swallowing tiny placebos she'd swapped out herself while he turned away. Her hands trembled slightly as she pretended to struggle with even the simplest tasks, reaching for a glass of water, adjusting her blanket, turning the pages of a book. Each act was deliberate, designed to lull him into a false sense of security. "You're doing better," he said one evening, his voice tinged with something between pride and pity. "I knew you could pull through this." Eleanor forced a small smile, tilting her head up at him like a grateful child. "Thank you, Jonathan," she murmured softly. "I couldn't have done it without you." Inside, she seethed. Every word felt like acid on her tongue, but she swallowed it down. This wasn't the time for confrontation. Not yet. Unbeknownst to Jonathan, Eleanor had begun reclaiming her strength. Behind closed doors, she pushed herself harder than ever before. Physical therapy became her battlefield, each session a step closer to independence. At first, progress was agonizingly slow, lifting weights no heavier than a soup can, stretching muscles stiff from disuse. But with every ounce of determination, she grew stronger. Her therapist, a kind but firm woman named Clara, noticed the change almost immediately. "You're working harder than anyone I've ever seen," Clara said during one particularly grueling session. "What's driving you?" Eleanor paused, her breath coming in shallow gasps as she lowered the resistance band. For a moment, she considered telling Clara the truth, that her husband had tried to destroy her, and she planned to rise from the ashes like a phoenix. Instead, she simply smiled. "Let's just say I have a lot to prove, to myself." Clara nodded knowingly, though there was a flicker of curiosity in her eyes. From then on, their sessions grew more intense, pushing Eleanor beyond her limits. By the end of each day, her body ached, but her spirit soared. She could feel herself coming back to life, piece by piece. While rebuilding her physical strength, Eleanor also focused on gathering evidence against Jonathan. With Marcus Reed's help, she methodically compiled documents, recordings, and photographs that painted a damning picture of his betrayal. Hidden bank statements revealed his financial manipulations, surveillance footage confirmed his presence at the construction site before her accident, tampered prescriptions exposed his attempts to keep her docile and dependent. But Eleanor didn't stop there. She began planting seeds of doubt within Jonathan's carefully constructed world. Casual comments here and there, "Did you know Detective Reed is auditing our accounts?" or "I heard they're reopening investigations into workplace safety violations," kept him on edge. She watched as his confident facade cracked, paranoia creeping into his movements and decisions. Still, she played the role of the dutiful wife flawlessly. She attended events with him, smiling politely as Sophia hovered nearby like a vulture circling its prey. She listened attentively when he spoke about business deals, nodding along as though none of it mattered anymore. And she let him believe he still held all the power. In private, however, Eleanor plotted her next move. Legal action was inevitable. She intended to take everything from him, his company, his reputation, his freedom. But she wouldn't rush it. Revenge, after all, was best served cold, and she wanted Jonathan to feel the full weight of his mistakes before the final blow landed. One night, as she sat alone in her study, Eleanor stared at the stack of evidence spread across her desk. The pieces were falling into place, and soon, the trap would be set. She allowed herself a rare moment of satisfaction, letting the corners of her mouth curl upward in a sly, triumphant smile. Jonathan thought he'd won. He thought he'd broken her. He couldn't have been more wrong. Eleanor Carter had always been resourceful, but tonight, she needed help. Her sister Lisa was the only person she trusted enough to bring into her web of secrets. Lisa wasn't just family, she was fiercely loyal, whip-smart, and had a knack for technology that bordered on genius. If anyone could crack Jonathan's digital fortress, it was her. The two sisters sat side by side in Eleanor's dimly lit study, laptops glowing softly in the quiet room. A pot of coffee brewed nearby, its rich aroma mingling with the tension in the air. Eleanor glanced at Lisa, who was already typing furiously, her fingers flying across the keyboard like a pianist performing a concerto. "All right," Lisa said, her voice low but steady. "Let's see what skeletons your husband has hiding in his closet." Eleanor leaned closer, her heart pounding as Lisa navigated through layers of firewalls and encrypted files. Jonathan had always been meticulous about covering his tracks, but no system was foolproof, not against someone as determined as Lisa. It took nearly an hour, but finally, they broke through. The screen filled with folders upon folders of documents, each one more incriminating than the last. Eleanor felt her breath hitch as she scrolled through them, her eyes widening with every revelation. There were emails detailing fraudulent transactions, contracts forged, deals manipulated, and funds siphoned off into offshore accounts. Bank statements showed millions disappearing from Carter Development's coffers, funneled into shell companies under Jonathan's control. But the most damning discovery came when they stumbled upon a file labeled Foundation Accounts. "What's this?" Lisa muttered, clicking it open. Eleanor froze as the contents appeared on the screen. It was worse than she'd imagined. For years, Jonathan had been using their charitable foundation, a project Eleanor herself had championed, as a front for embezzlement. Donations meant to build schools, fund scholarships, and support local communities had instead lined his pockets. Millions of dollars earmarked for good had vanished without a trace. "He's been stealing from our own foundation," Eleanor whispered, her voice trembling with rage. "From my work." Lisa placed a hand on her shoulder, squeezing gently. "Ellie, we've got him now. This is everything you need to take him down." But Eleanor wasn't finished yet. She kept digging, scrolling deeper into the labyrinth of corruption until she found something even more chilling, a series of memos between Jonathan and a high-ranking official at the construction company responsible for the site where she'd fallen. One memo stood out, a brief note dated just days before her accident. Asterisk, platform integrity compromised. Proceed with caution. Asterisk. Her hands clenched into fists as she read the words over and over again. There it was, the final piece of the puzzle. Jonathan hadn't just neglected safety protocols, he'd ignored explicit warnings that the platform was unsafe. He'd let her walk onto it anyway, fully aware of the risk. "That bastard," Lisa hissed, reading over her shoulder. "He knew exactly what he was doing." Eleanor didn't respond. She couldn't. The weight of the betrayal pressed down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. Every lie, every manipulation, every act of cruelty, it all made sense now. Jonathan hadn't just wanted her out of the way, he'd been willing to kill her for his greed. For a long moment, neither sister spoke. The silence in the room was heavy, broken only by the faint hum of the computer fans. Finally, Lisa broke it. "So, what's the plan?" she asked, her voice firm. "You've got enough evidence here to bury him 10 times over." Eleanor nodded slowly, her mind racing. She'd spent months gathering intel, playing the role of the obedient wife while secretly preparing for this moment. Now, armed with irrefutable proof of Jonathan's crimes, she could strike back, and not just personally. She intended to dismantle everything he'd built. His empire, his reputation, his carefully constructed facade, it would all come crashing down. And she would make sure the world knew exactly who he really was. "I'm going to ruin him," Eleanor said quietly, her voice cold and resolute. "Not just for me, but for everyone he's hurt along the way." Lisa smiled, a glint of admiration in her eyes. "Then let's get to work." Together, they began organizing the files, creating backups, and drafting plans for how to present the evidence. By morning, they had a strategy in place, one that would expose Jonathan's sins to the world and ensure he paid for every single one of them. As dawn broke outside, casting golden light through the study windows, Eleanor allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. The pieces of the puzzle were finally complete, and the picture they formed was devastating. Jonathan thought he was untouchable. He was wrong. Eleanor Carter had always been a woman who believed in preparation, but now, she was operating on another level entirely. Every move she made was calculated, every decision deliberate. She wasn't just gathering evidence anymore, she was setting a trap, one Jonathan wouldn't see coming until it was too late. Her first step was hiring a private investigator named Victor Kane, a grizzled veteran of the surveillance game with a reputation for being relentless. Eleanor didn't waste time beating around the bush when they met at a discreet cafe downtown. "I need you to follow my husband," she said, her voice low but steady. "Find out where he goes, who he meets, and what he's planning." Victor raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued. "You got reason to believe something's up?" "Let's just say I suspect he's not as loyal as he pretends to be," Eleanor replied with a faint smile that didn't reach her eyes. Victor nodded, jotting down notes. "Consider it done." Over the next few weeks, Victor delivered updates that confirmed Eleanor's worst fears, and then some. Jonathan wasn't just cheating on her, he was building a new life with Sophia. And he wasn't doing it quietly. The most shocking revelation came when Victor uncovered a property purchase Jonathan had made under a shell company. A penthouse in Manhattan's Upper East Side, complete with floor-to-ceiling windows, marble countertops, and a panoramic view of Central Park. It was extravagant, luxurious, and unmistakably intended for Sophia. "He's moving her into high society," Victor explained during their latest meeting. "Looks like he's planning to make her his trophy wife once he cuts ties with you." Eleanor clenched her jaw, forcing herself to stay calm. "Anything else?" Victor hesitated before continuing. "There's more. He's been consulting lawyers about declaring you mentally incompetent. Says your accident left you unstable, unable to manage finances or make decisions." For a moment, Eleanor felt the ground shift beneath her feet. Declaring her mentally incompetent would allow Jonathan to seize full control of their assets, lock her out of Carter development permanently, and paint her as a broken, unreliable figure in the public eye. But anger quickly replaced shock. If Jonathan thought she'd roll over and let him erase her existence, he was gravely mistaken. "Thank you, Victor," she said coolly, standing to leave. "You've given me everything I need." As she walked away, Eleanor's mind raced. This wasn't just betrayal, it was war. And if Jonathan wanted to play dirty, she'd show him exactly how it was done. Back home, Eleanor began crafting her counterattack. She knew she couldn't confront him directly, not yet. Instead, she decided to turn the tables by feeding his ego, making him believe he was winning. She started acting more erratic, deliberately letting slip comments that hinted at confusion or instability. At dinner one night, she stared blankly at her plate, muttering, "I don't remember ordering this." Another time, she misplaced her phone and pretended to panic, claiming she must have left it somewhere important. Each act was subtle but effective, planting seeds of doubt in Jonathan's mind. Meanwhile, she continued strengthening her position behind the scenes. With Lisa's help, she created encrypted backups of all the evidence against Jonathan, storing them in secure locations he'd never think to look. She also reached out to trusted allies within Carter Development, people who owed their careers to her, not Jonathan, and quietly secured their loyalty. But the piece de resistance came when Eleanor discovered Jonathan's timeline for leaving her. According to Victor, Jonathan planned to file for divorce and announce his engagement to Sophia at a charity gala in 2 weeks' time. The event was already generating buzz in social circles, with media outlets clamoring for invitations. Eleanor smiled to herself as she reviewed the details. What Jonathan didn't know was that this gala would mark the beginning of his downfall, not hers. She spent hours preparing, ensuring every detail of her plan was flawless. First, she drafted a press release exposing Jonathan's crimes, complete with irrefutable evidence from the files she'd uncovered. Then, she contacted a journalist friend who specialized in investigative reporting, offering an exclusive story that would break just moments after the gala began. Finally, she arranged for legal documents to be filed simultaneously, freezing Jonathan's access to their joint accounts and launching a lawsuit against him for fraud, embezzlement, and attempted murder. By the time the night was over, Jonathan wouldn't just lose his empire, he'd lose everything. As she sat alone in her study, reviewing her checklist one final time, Eleanor felt a strange sense of peace wash over her. For years, she'd lived in the shadow of Jonathan's manipulation and cruelty. But no longer. Now, she was the predator, and he was the prey. Jonathan thought he was untouchable, that he could discard her like yesterday's trash and walk away unscathed. He was wrong. And soon, the entire world would know it. Eleanor Carter had always been a woman of precision, and now, as she prepared for her final move against Jonathan, every detail mattered. She wasn't just seeking revenge, she was reclaiming what was rightfully hers, her dignity, her independence, and most importantly, control of Carter Development. Her secret weapon came in the form of a tiny voice recorder hidden in the lapel of her blazer. For weeks, she'd worn it during private conversations with Jonathan, capturing his careless admissions of guilt. He talked freely around her, assuming she was too weak or distracted to notice. But Eleanor noticed everything. One evening, as they sat in the opulent living room of their Malibu mansion, Jonathan sipped scotch while boasting about his plans for the future. "Once I'm rid of you," he said casually, swirling the amber liquid in his glass, "I'll have full control of the company. Sophia understands how things work, unlike you." Eleanor smiled faintly, nodding along as if his words didn't sting. Inside, however, she burned with quiet fury. Each sentence he spoke added another layer to the case she was building against him. Later that night, she transferred the recordings to a secure drive and sent them to Camila Vega, a high-profile investigative journalist known for exposing corruption among the elite. Camila had built her career on taking down powerful men, and Eleanor knew she'd relish the chance to dismantle Jonathan Carter's empire. The two women met discreetly at a quiet cafe in Santa Monica. Eleanor slid a USB drive across the table, her expression calm but resolute. "This will change everything," she said simply. Camila examined the drive, then looked up at Eleanor with sharp, curious eyes. "You sure you want to do this? Once this goes public, there's no turning back." "I'm sure," Eleanor replied without hesitation. "Jonathan deserves to be exposed for who he really is. And I intend to take back what he stole from me." Camilla nodded, impressed by Eleanor's determination. All right. Consider it done. This story will break during the charity gala, right when he's basking in the spotlight. With the media angles secured, Eleanor turned her attention to the next phase of her plan, taking over Carter Development. Over the years, she'd built strong relationships with key figures within the company, people who respected her vision and creativity. Now, she reached out to them one by one, revealing Jonathan's crimes and asking for their support. To her relief, they rallied behind her. Many admitted they'd suspected something was off about Jonathan's leadership but hadn't dared to question him. With Eleanor leading the charge, they were ready to stand against him. She also worked tirelessly to ensure the legal groundwork was flawless. Lawyers drafted documents freezing Jonathan's access to company funds and personal assets. Court orders were prepared to seize control of his offshore accounts and prevent him from fleeing the country. By the time the gala rolled around, every piece of the puzzle was in place. As she dressed for the event, a sleek black gown that hugged her figure and exuded power, Eleanor allowed herself a moment of reflection. For so long, she'd felt trapped, powerless, and betrayed. But tonight, she would emerge victorious, not just as a survivor, but as a force to be reckoned with. The gala was held at the Beverly Wilshire Hotel, a glittering affair attended by celebrities, politicians, and business magnates. Cameras flashed as guests arrived, their laughter and chatter filling the grand ballroom. Jonathan stood at the center of it all, looking every bit the triumphant CEO as he mingled with investors and posed for photos. But Eleanor knew better. Beneath his polished exterior lay a man teetering on the edge of ruin, and she was about to push him over. Halfway through the evening, Camila Vega made her move. She stepped onto the stage, microphone in hand, and addressed the stunned audience. "Ladies and gentlemen, I have breaking news," she announced, her voice cutting through the hum of conversation. "Evidence has surfaced implicating Jonathan Carter in widespread fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. Tonight, we expose the truth behind the man you thought you knew." Gasps rippled through the crowd as Camila displayed damning documents and played audio clips of Jonathan's recorded confessions. The room erupted into chaos, reporters rushing forward to capture reactions while security guards scrambled to maintain order. Jonathan's face turned pale as he realized what was happening. His gaze darted wildly around the room until it landed on Eleanor, standing calmly near the entrance with a satisfied smile playing on her lips. "You planned this," he spat, his voice trembling with rage. Eleanor stepped forward, her green eyes glinting like steel. "Yes, Jonathan. I did. And now, the world knows exactly who you are." As police officers arrived to escort him away, Eleanor turned to the board members gathered nearby. "Carter Development belongs to those who built it, not those who destroyed it. Together, we'll rebuild what he tried to ruin." Applause broke out, tentative at first but growing louder as the reality sank in. Eleanor Carter wasn't just surviving, she was thriving. And Jonathan? He was finished. The grand ballroom of the Beverly Wilshire Hotel buzzed with energy, a sea of champagne flutes and designer gowns glittering under crystal chandeliers. Jonathan Carter stood at the center of it all, basking in the spotlight as he made his rounds, shaking hands and exchanging pleasantries with investors and socialites. To anyone watching, he appeared untouchable, a man at the peak of his power. But Eleanor Carter knew better. She hovered near the edges of the room, her presence unassuming yet deliberate. Dressed in a sleek black gown that radiated quiet authority, she blended into the crowd while keeping a watchful eye on Jonathan. Tonight was her moment, and she intended to make it unforgettable. As the speeches began, Jonathan took the stage, his confident grin lighting up the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice smooth and commanding, "tonight marks not just a celebration of success but a new chapter for Carter Development." Before he could continue, the lights dimmed unexpectedly, plunging the room into semi-darkness. Murmurs rippled through the audience as a large screen descended from the ceiling, flickering to life with a single phrase displayed in bold white letters, *, the truth about Jonathan Carter. *. Eleanor stepped forward, her heels clicking against the marble floor as she approached the stage. Every head turned toward her, curiosity mingling with confusion. Without hesitation, she climbed the steps and stood beside Jonathan, who stared at her in disbelief. "What are you doing?" he hissed, his polished facade cracking slightly. Eleanor ignored him, addressing the crowd instead. "Good evening, everyone," she began, her voice calm but firm, carrying effortlessly across the silent room. "I'm Eleanor Carter, co-founder of this company, and tonight, I'm here to share something important." With a press of a button, the screen shifted to grainy security footage from the construction site where her accident had occurred. The camera zoomed in on Jonathan himself, inspecting the faulty platform just days before her fall. His face was unmistakable as he spoke briefly with the foreman before walking away. "This," Eleanor said, gesturing to the footage, "is my husband, knowingly ignoring safety warnings about the very platform that collapsed beneath me. He didn't just neglect protocol, he deliberately put me in harm's way." Gasps echoed through the ballroom as guests exchanged shocked glances. Jonathan's face turned pale, beads of sweat forming on his forehead. But Eleanor wasn't done. With another click, the screen displayed documents detailing embezzlement schemes, illegal offshore accounts, and fraudulent transactions. Bank statements showed millions funneled out of Carter Development into shell companies under Jonathan's control. "These funds," Eleanor continued, her voice rising slightly, "were meant to support our foundation, to build schools, fund scholarships, and help communities in need. Instead, they lined Jonathan's pockets while he built a secret life with his mistress." A collective murmur swept through the crowd as photos of Sophia and Jonathan appeared on screen, including images of the penthouse he'd purchased for her. Some attendees whispered angrily, others simply stared in stunned silence. Jonathan grabbed the microphone, attempting to regain control. "This is outrageous," he shouted, his voice trembling with desperation. "These allegations are lies, fabrications designed to destroy my reputation." "They're not lies," Eleanor countered, stepping closer to him. Her green eyes burned with intensity as she added, "They're your choices, Jonathan. Choices you thought no one would uncover." Before he could respond further, the doors to the ballroom burst open. FBI agents entered, their badges gleaming under the chandeliers as they moved purposefully toward the stage. "Jonathan Carter," one agent announced, reading from a warrant, "you are under arrest for fraud, embezzlement, conspiracy, and attempted murder." Panic flashed across Jonathan's face as reality sank in. He tried to resist, stammering protests and pleading innocence, but the agents were unyielding. As they led him away in handcuffs, the room erupted into chaos, reporters shouting questions, cameras flashing wildly, and guests whispering furiously among themselves. Eleanor watched silently as Jonathan disappeared through the doors, his once imposing figure reduced to nothing more than a disgraced criminal. When the noise subsided, she turned back to the audience, her expression composed and resolute. Carter Development was built on integrity, innovation, and hard work, she declared, her voice steady and full of conviction. "Tonight, we begin the process of restoring those values. Together, we will rebuild what has been damaged, not just for ourselves, but for the people who depend on us." Applause broke out, slow at first but growing louder as the weight of her words sank in. Board members stepped forward, offering their support, while reporters scrambled to capture every detail of the dramatic takedown. For Eleanor, this wasn't just a victory, it was redemption. She had faced betrayal, manipulation, and near death, only to rise stronger than ever before. And as she stood there, bathed in the glow of the chandeliers, she knew one thing for certain: Jonathan Carter would never hurt anyone again. In the weeks following the gala, Jonathan Carter's world unraveled faster than anyone could have predicted. Once hailed as a visionary leader, he became a pariah, an emblem of greed and betrayal. Lawsuits poured in from every direction, investors demanding restitution, employees seeking justice, and charities accusing him of misusing funds meant for good causes. The media had a field day, dissecting every aspect of his downfall. Headlines blared across newspapers and TV screens: real estate mogul exposed, fraud, embezzlement, and attempted murder, Jonathan Carter's house of cards collapses. Reporters camped outside his mansion, capturing grainy photos of him pacing behind drawn curtains, his face etched with desperation. But the worst blow came when Sophia Bennett finally walked away. For months, she'd believed herself to be the center of Jonathan's universe, the woman destined to take Eleanor's place. But now, standing in the wreckage of his ruined empire, she realized the truth: she'd been nothing more than a pawn in his game. "I'm done," she told him coldly during one of their final meetings. "You used me, Jonathan. And now you're dragging me down with you." Her words cut deeper than any legal battle ever could. As she stormed out of the room, leaving behind her designer handbag and engagement ring, Jonathan slumped into a chair, defeated. Without his charm, wealth, or power, he was nothing, a hollow shell of the man he once pretended to be. When the judge delivered his verdict, 10 years in federal prison without parole, Jonathan barely reacted. He sat silently in the courtroom, his head bowed, as reporters scribbled notes and cameras captured his shame. Public disgrace was bad enough, but imprisonment sealed his fate. By the time he emerged, if he ever did, the world would have moved on without him. Meanwhile, Eleanor Carter stepped into her new role with grace and determination. With Jonathan stripped of his influence, she took full control of Carter Development, renaming it Carter Innovations. The change symbolized not just a fresh start but a commitment to transparency, creativity, and ethical leadership. She wasted no time implementing sweeping reforms. Projects that prioritized sustainability and community impact replaced questionable ventures. She reinvested profits into charitable initiatives, ensuring the foundation she'd championed would thrive under her watchful eye. Employees who had once feared Jonathan now looked to Eleanor as a beacon of hope, a leader who valued integrity over ambition. But perhaps the most remarkable transformation was personal. Determined to prove Jonathan wrong about her limitations, Eleanor pushed herself harder than ever before. Physical therapy sessions became her sanctuary, each milestone marking another step toward reclaiming her independence. Slowly but surely, she regained strength, not just in her body, but in her spirit. One sunny morning, nearly a year after the gala, Eleanor stood at the edge of a hiking trail overlooking Malibu Canyon. Her wheelchair sat nearby, abandoned for the day. With Lisa by her side, she took tentative steps forward, her legs trembling but steady. "You've come so far," Lisa said, her voice thick with emotion. Eleanor smiled, breathing in the crisp air. "I'm not done yet," she replied. "There's still so much I want to do." As they continued along the trail, Eleanor reflected on everything she'd endured. The accident, the betrayal, the fight for justice, it had all shaped her into someone stronger, wiser, and more resilient than she'd ever imagined. Back at the office later that afternoon, Eleanor addressed her team during an all-hands meeting. Standing confidently at the front of the conference room, she spoke with quiet authority. "We've faced challenges, scandals, and setbacks," she began, her green eyes scanning the room. "But we've also proven that integrity can prevail. That innovation can rebuild what was broken. And that together, we are capable of incredible things." Applause erupted, genuine and heartfelt. Board members nodded approvingly, while younger employees scribbled notes, inspired by her vision. For Eleanor, this wasn't just a victory, it was a rebirth. She had risen from the ashes of betrayal, transforming pain into purpose and loss into legacy. And as she left the building that evening, the golden hues of sunset casting long shadows across the cityscape, she felt a profound sense of peace. Jonathan's fall from grace had been inevitable, but her rise had been earned, one courageous step at a time. Eleanor Carter wasn't just rebuilding her company, she was rebuilding herself. After everything she'd endured, she knew she couldn't move forward without finding meaning in her pain. And so, she turned her focus outward, using her experiences to help others who faced similar struggles. It started with a simple idea: creating a foundation dedicated to supporting women who had suffered financial abuse, a silent epidemic that too often went unrecognized. Eleanor understood firsthand how insidious it could be, the way Jonathan had isolated her, controlled her access to money, and manipulated her into believing she was powerless. She wanted to ensure no one else would have to endure what she had. The Eleanor Carter Foundation launched 6 months after Jonathan's arrest, quickly gaining traction as a beacon of hope for countless women across the country. Its mission was twofold: to provide legal resources and financial literacy programs for survivors, and to raise awareness about the signs of financial abuse. At its core, the foundation was deeply personal for Eleanor. She poured her heart into every aspect, from designing workshops to partnering with advocacy groups. One of her proudest initiatives was a mentorship program aimed at helping survivors regain their independence. Through one-on-one coaching, participants learned how to rebuild credit, manage finances, and navigate the complexities of divorce or separation when assets were involved. "I want them to know they're not alone," Eleanor explained during a press conference announcing the foundation. "What happened to me doesn't define me, and it shouldn't define anyone else either." Her words resonated far beyond the room, sparking conversations on social media and drawing attention to an issue many had overlooked. Donations poured in from supporters nationwide, including former colleagues at Carter Innovations who admired her resilience. But Eleanor didn't stop there. As someone who had always been passionate about architecture and design, she also launched a mentorship initiative for young architects, particularly women and minorities who often faced barriers in the male-dominated industry. Every Friday afternoon, Eleanor hosted informal sessions at her office, inviting aspiring designers to present their ideas and receive feedback. She encouraged creativity, pushing them to think outside the box while staying grounded in practicality. One mentee, a bright-eyed graduate named Mia Torres, stood out in particular. Her innovative designs for affordable housing caught Eleanor's attention immediately. "You have a gift," Eleanor told her during one session, leaning forward with genuine enthusiasm. "Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Mia blushed, clearly moved by the compliment. "Thank you, Ms. Carter. I wouldn't be here without your support." Eleanor smiled softly, remembering how much she'd needed encouragement early in her career. "Pay it forward," she said simply. "That's all I ask." Beyond her professional endeavors, Eleanor found joy in rediscovering parts of herself she thought she'd lost. She rekindled old hobbies, painting abstract landscapes in her studio, practicing yoga on the beach at sunrise, and even learning to play the piano. Each activity brought a sense of fulfillment she hadn't felt in years. Her physical recovery continued to amaze those around her. While doctors had warned her progress might plateau, Eleanor refused to accept limitations. With relentless determination, she pushed through pain and fatigue, eventually walking unaided for extended periods. One evening, as she strolled along the Santa Monica Pier with Lisa, the lights of the Ferris wheel reflecting off the water, Eleanor paused to take it all in. "Do you ever think about how far you've come?" Lisa asked, glancing at her sister with admiration. "All the time," Eleanor replied, her voice soft but steady. "But I don't dwell on the past. I'm focused on what's next." And she meant it. Every day brought new opportunities, to inspire, to lead, to heal. Eleanor had transformed tragedy into triumph, proving that even in the darkest moments, light could break through. As she stood there, surrounded by laughter and the hum of life around her, she felt a deep sense of gratitude. For the first time in years, she wasn't looking over her shoulder or waiting for the other shoe to drop. She was free, free to dream, to create, to live on her own terms. Jonathan's shadow no longer loomed over her. Instead, she cast her own, one that stretched wide and touched lives in ways she never imagined. The prison walls were cold and gray, a stark contrast to the opulent world Jonathan Carter once inhabited. Gone were the tailored suits, the polished shoes, the gleaming smiles that charmed investors and dazzled socialites. Now, he wore drab orange jumpsuits and shared cramped quarters with men who had no patience for weakness. It had been over a year since his arrest, but the weight of his downfall pressed down on him like a leaden blanket. Every day was a reminder of what he'd lost, his freedom, his empire, his reputation. And worst of all, Eleanor. Jonathan sat on the edge of his bunk, staring at the cracked concrete floor as memories haunted him. He thought about the gala, the moment Eleanor exposed him in front of everyone. Her calm, unyielding voice still echoed in his mind, cutting deeper than any blade. She hadn't screamed or cried, she hadn't needed to. Her silence spoke volumes. He clenched his fists, frustration boiling inside him. How had it come to this? He'd been so close to having everything, the money, the power, Sophia by his side. But instead, he was here, trapped in this hellhole while Eleanor walked free, stronger than ever. Desperation clawed at him. There had to be a way out. A way to fix things. One afternoon, during visiting hours, Jonathan seized an opportunity. For months, he'd begged his lawyer to arrange a meeting with Eleanor, insisting he needed to speak with her directly. At first, she refused to entertain the idea, but eventually, curiosity, or perhaps pity, got the better of her. When Jonathan saw her walk into the visiting room, his heart skipped a beat. She looked different, not just physically, though her posture was straighter, her eyes brighter. It was something else, something intangible. Confidence radiated from her, an aura of strength and purpose that left no room for doubt. This was a woman who had reclaimed her life. Eleanor took a seat across from him, her expression unreadable. The glass partition between them felt symbolic, a barrier neither could cross. "Thank you for coming," Jonathan began, his voice trembling slightly. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but—" "You're right," Eleanor interrupted, her tone calm but firm. "You don't." Her words hit him like a punch to the gut. He swallowed hard, forcing himself to continue. "I made mistakes, Ellie. Terrible ones. But I never meant for you to get hurt, not really. You have to believe me." Eleanor leaned back in her chair, studying him with detached curiosity. "Do you even hear yourself?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. "You didn't mean for me to get hurt? Jonathan, you stood by while I fell off a faulty platform. You tampered with my medication. You tried to erase me, to destroy everything I worked for. Don't insult my intelligence by pretending you're some tragic victim in all this." Jonathan flinched, her words slicing through his defenses. He opened his mouth to argue, but nothing came out. What could he say? She was right. "I'm not here because I want your apology," Eleanor continued, her voice softening slightly. "I'm here because I wanted to see you face the consequences of your actions. To remind myself that justice exists, even if it takes time." She paused, letting the silence stretch between them. When she spoke again, there was a finality in her tone. "You destroyed lives, Jonathan, including mine. But you won't ruin anyone else's. Not anymore." Tears welled up in Jonathan's eyes, but Eleanor didn't flinch. She watched him with steely resolve, refusing to let guilt or pity cloud her judgment. This wasn't about revenge, it was about closure. After a long moment, she stood, signaling the guard that she was ready to leave. "Wait!" Jonathan called out, pressing his hands against the glass. "Please, Ellie. I need you. I can't do this alone." Eleanor stopped mid-step, turning back to look at him one last time. Her gaze was unwavering, her voice steady. "Yes, you can," she said simply. And you will. With that, she turned and walked away, leaving Jonathan staring after her, tears streaming down his face. As the heavy door clicked shut behind her, Eleanor exhaled deeply, feeling a weight lift from her shoulders. For years, she'd carried the burden of his betrayal, letting it shape her anger and fuel her fight for justice. But now, standing outside the prison walls, she realized something profound. She no longer needed Jonathan to define her story. He was where he belonged, in a place where he could harm no one else. And she? She was free. 1 year had passed since the night Jonathan Carter's world crumbled at the Beverly Wilshire Hotel. For Eleanor, it felt like a lifetime, not just because of everything she'd endured, but because of how much she'd grown. She wasn't the same woman who had once sat silently in her wheelchair, watching her husband betray her on stage. That Eleanor was gone, replaced by someone stronger, wiser, and unapologetically herself. Tonight, she stood backstage at the prestigious National Architecture Awards, adjusting the lapel of her tailored navy blue suit. Her heart raced, not from nerves, but from excitement. This moment wasn't just about recognition, it was validation. A testament to everything she'd fought for, everything she'd rebuilt. When her name was called, and the winner of this year's Lifetime Achievement Award goes to Eleanor Carter. The crowd erupted into applause. She stepped onto the stage, her heels clicking confidently against the polished floor, and accepted the trophy with a smile that lit up the room. As she approached the microphone, the noise settled into a hush. Hundreds of eyes were fixed on her, waiting. Eleanor took a deep breath, letting the weight of the moment wash over her before she began to speak. "Thank you," she said, her voice steady and warm. "This award means more to me than words can express. But tonight, I don't want to talk about buildings or blueprints, at least, not entirely. Instead, I want to talk about resilience." She paused, scanning the audience. Faces young and old looked back at her, eager to hear what came next. "Resilience isn't just about bouncing back," she continued. "It's about rising higher than you ever thought possible. It's about finding strength when you feel weak, hope when you feel hopeless, and purpose when you feel lost. And trust me, I've been there." A ripple of murmurs spread through the crowd. Everyone knew her story by now, the betrayal, the accident, the fight for justice. But hearing it from her, in her own words, made it feel real in a way headlines never could. "I won't pretend the past few years have been easy," Eleanor admitted, her tone softening slightly. "There were days when I didn't know if I could keep going. Days when I doubted my ability to stand, literally and figuratively. But here's what I learned: sometimes, the hardest battles teach us the most valuable lessons. They show us who we really are, and what we're truly capable of." Her gaze drifted momentarily to the trophy in her hands, then back to the audience. "For so long, I let others define me. My husband, my injury, my circumstances, they all shaped how I saw myself. But eventually, I realized something important: power doesn't come from titles or wealth or even other people's opinions. Power comes from within. From knowing your worth and refusing to settle for anything less." The room erupted into applause again, louder this time. Some attendees wiped away tears, moved by her words. Others nodded in agreement, inspired by her message of perseverance and self-worth. Eleanor smiled, basking in the energy of the moment. She adjusted the microphone slightly before delivering her closing remarks. "So, to anyone out there who feels like they've hit rock bottom, remember this: you are stronger than you think. You are braver than you believe. And no matter how dark things may seem right now, there is always a way forward. Build your foundation on integrity, creativity, and kindness, and nothing will be able to knock you down." With that, she raised the trophy high, earning one final wave of cheers. As she walked off stage, the weight of the award felt lighter than expected, not because it was insignificant, but because she carried something far greater inside her: pride. Later that evening, Eleanor found herself standing alone on the balcony of the event venue, gazing out at the city skyline. The lights twinkled like stars, endless and full of possibility. She thought about how far she'd come, from the depths of despair to the pinnacle of success. Lisa joined her moments later, handing over a glass of champagne. "Big night," she said with a grin. Eleanor chuckled softly, taking a sip. "Yeah. It feels surreal." "You deserve every bit of it," Lisa replied, nudging her shoulder playfully. Eleanor nodded, setting the glass down on the railing. For a long moment, she simply stood there, soaking in the view. Then, turning to Lisa, she said, "You know what? This isn't the end. It's just the beginning." Her sister raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" "I mean," Eleanor said, her eyes sparkling with determination, "there's still so much to do. So many lives to touch, projects to create, dreams to chase. I'm not done yet." Lisa laughed, shaking her head. "Of course you're not. That's why I love you." Eleanor smiled, looking back at the horizon. The future stretched out before her, wide open and full of promise. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she knew she could face them, not because she was fearless, but because she'd already proven she was brave enough to overcome the impossible. And as she stood there, bathed in the glow of the city lights, she felt truly alive.